The road that changed America, how the Lincoln Highway was born. Before highways had numbers, they had names that stirred the soul. And none of those names carried more weight in American history than the Lincoln Highway. It wasn't just a road, it was a revolution. A 3,389-mile ribbon of hope stretching from Times Square in New York City to Lincoln Park in San Francisco, promising Americans they could climb into an automobile and drive themselves across an entire continent. From sea to shining sea, it connected 13 states and countless dreams, with the first transcontinental highway designed specifically for the automobile. If you've ever driven cross-country, you've probably followed parts of its path. You see it on historical markers, maybe even traveled stretches, still called Lincoln Highway. But do you know its history? Today, we're telling the origin story of the Lincoln Highway, how it was imagined, how it was built, and how it changed not just American transportation, but America itself. Come with me as we go beyond the exit. Chapter 1. Before the Lincoln Highway. In 1912, driving from New York to San Francisco was not a journey. It was an expedition. There was no road across America. What passed for highways were a chaotic patchwork of local roads, farm tracks, and wagon trails that often led nowhere or simply disappeared into mud when it rained. Dr. Horatio Nelson Jackson proved it could be done in 1903 when he made the first successful transcontinental automobile trip. But Jackson's journey took 63 days, required constant repairs, and cost him over $8,000, more than most Americans earned in 5 years. His route wandered through Wyoming, Idaho, and Oregon because there simply was no direct path across the continent. And it's important to remember what America looked like in those days before the Lincoln Highway. In 1912, the automobile was still fighting for respect. Henry Ford's Model T was beginning to put cars within reach of ordinary families, but most people still viewed automobiles as expensive toys for the wealthy. The horse and buggy remained the primary means of transportation in rural America. The roads themselves were a testament to America's fragmented approach to transportation. Each state, each county, sometimes each township, had its own ideas about road construction and maintenance. A smooth macadam road in Pennsylvania might become a rutted dirt track in Ohio and disappear entirely into prairie grass in Nebraska. Navigation was a nightmare. There were no road signs, no maps designed for automobile travel, no consistent route markings. Travelers relied on local directions, railroad guides, and pure luck to find their way. Getting lost wasn't just inconvenient, it could be dangerous or even fatal in the vast empty spaces of the American West. Yet visionaries understood what was at stake. They saw the automobile's potential to unite a continent, to connect isolated communities with the broader American economy, to fulfill the promise of manifest destiny in a new and revolutionary way. The railroad had connected America in the 19th century, but it was a centralized system that served the needs of railroad companies. The automobile promised individual freedom, the ability for any American to travel anywhere, anytime, under their own power. The vision was there, waiting for someone with the resources and determination to make it real. And that's where Carl Graham Fisher enters the story. Chapter 2. The Dreamer. Carl Graham Fisher didn't think small. By 1912, the Indianapolis entrepreneur had already made and lost several fortunes in the bicycle business, the automobile industry, and real estate development. He'd co-founded the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, turning a cow pasture into the most famous racing venue in America. He'd pioneered the use of automobile headlights, making night driving possible for the first time. But Fisher's greatest vision was still ahead of him. A highway that would span the entire American continent. The idea came to him during a dinner party in September 1912. Fisher was entertaining friends at his Indianapolis home when the conversation turned to the sorry state of American roads. Someone mentioned that it would take decades for local governments to build decent highways connecting major cities. Fisher, never one to accept limitations, had a different idea. "Why wait for the government?" he asked. Why not build it ourselves? Fisher's proposal was audacious, even by his standards. He envisioned a private highway company that would raise money from automobile manufacturers, tire companies, and other businesses that would benefit from improved roads. The highway would be built to the highest standards of the day: concrete or brick pavement, proper drainage, standardized width, and consistent signage. Most importantly, it would be a coast-to-coast route that would demonstrate the automobile's potential to transform American life. Fisher called it a road across the United States, but he knew it needed a better name, something that would capture the American imagination and honor the nation's greatest president. The Lincoln Highway was born not just from Fisher's vision, but from his understanding of American psychology. Abraham Lincoln represented everything the highway would embody: unity, progress, and the belief that ordinary Americans could achieve extraordinary things. The name would make the highway more than just a road; it would make it a patriotic cause. But Fisher faced enormous challenges. Building a transcontinental highway would cost millions of dollars at a time when the federal government spent almost nothing on roads. It would require cooperation from 13 states, hundreds of counties, and thousands of local officials. Most daunting of all, it would require convincing Americans that such a highway was not just possible, but necessary. Fisher's first step was to assemble a team of allies who shared his vision and had the resources to make it happen. He found them in Detroit, where the automobile industry was beginning to recognize that better roads were essential to expanding their market. Henry Joy, president of the Packard Motor Car Company, became Fisher's most important partner. Joy understood that automobile sales were limited by the poor condition of American roads. Wealthy customers might buy cars for local driving, but they wouldn't invest in expensive automobiles if they couldn't drive them beyond their immediate neighborhoods. Together, Fisher and Joy began recruiting other automobile industry leaders to their cause. They found enthusiastic supporters in Frank Seiberling of Goodyear Tire Company, who knew that better roads would mean more tire sales, and Roy Chapin of Hudson Motor Car Company, who had personally experienced the challenges of long-distance automobile travel. By early 1913, Fisher had assembled a coalition of business leaders who were willing to invest their money and reputations in the Lincoln Highway project. But they still faced the enormous challenge of actually building the road. Chapter 3. The Route. Choosing the route for the Lincoln Highway sparked the first great debate in American highway planning. Every city, every state, every region wanted the prestige and economic benefits that would come from being on America's first transcontinental highway. The competition was fierce, and the stakes were enormous. Fisher and his associates faced a fundamental choice. Should they follow the most direct route across the continent, or should they serve the largest number of people and communities? The direct route would be shorter and cheaper to build, but it would bypass major population centers. A route that served more cities would be longer and more expensive, but it would generate more traffic and support. The debate began in earnest at the first meeting of the Lincoln Highway Association, held in Detroit on July 1, 1913. Representatives from dozens of cities and states gathered to make their case for inclusion in the route. The arguments were passionate and sometimes bitter, as communities realized that being bypassed by the Lincoln Highway could mean economic stagnation for decades to come. The eastern terminus was relatively easy to decide. New York City was the nation's largest city and most important port, making it the logical starting point for a transcontinental highway. The route would begin at Times Square, the symbolic heart of American commerce and entertainment. The western terminus was more controversial. Los Angeles boosters argued that their rapidly growing city deserved to be the highway's destination. San Francisco supporters countered that their city was the established commercial center of the West Coast and the traditional gateway to the Pacific. Fisher and his associates ultimately chose San Francisco, partly because of the city's historical significance and partly because the route to San Francisco was more direct. The path between New York and San Francisco required more difficult decisions. The most direct route would have run through the southern states, but Fisher and his associates were concerned about the poor condition of southern roads and the region's limited automobile infrastructure. They chose instead to follow a northern route that would serve the industrial cities of the Midwest and the agricultural communities of the Great Plains. The final route was announced on September 10, 1913, at a ceremony in Indianapolis. The Lincoln Highway would run from New York City through New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, Nevada, and California to San Francisco. The total distance would be 3,389 miles, making it the longest highway in the world. The route selection satisfied some communities and disappointed others. Chicago celebrated its inclusion as a major stop on the highway. Denver rejoiced at being chosen over the more direct route through Kansas. But cities like St. Louis, Kansas City, and Los Angeles felt betrayed by their exclusion from the route. The disappointment was so intense that some excluded cities began planning their own transcontinental highways. The Dixie Highway would serve the South. The National Old Trails Road would connect the Midwest with Los Angeles. The Lincoln Highway had started a highway-building movement that would eventually crisscross the entire continent. But first, the Lincoln Highway itself had to be built, and that would prove to be an even greater challenge than choosing the route. Chapter 4. Building the Impossible. The Lincoln Highway Association faced a problem that no organization had ever confronted before: how to build a 3,389-mile highway across a continent with no federal highway program, no standardized construction methods, and no precedent for such an ambitious project. Fisher's original plan had been elegantly simple: raise $10 million from private donors, hire contractors to build the highway, and charge tolls to recover the investment. But the reality proved far more complicated. $10 million, an enormous sum in 1913, wouldn't be nearly enough to build a highway to modern standards across the entire continent. And the legal and political challenges of building a private toll road across 13 states seemed almost insurmountable. The association's solution was both pragmatic and revolutionary. Instead of building an entirely new highway, they would work with local governments to improve existing roads along the Lincoln Highway route. The association would provide technical expertise, promotional support, and some financial assistance, while local communities would do the actual construction work. This approach had several advantages. It was much less expensive than building a completely new highway. It avoided the legal complications of private road construction. And it created local ownership of the project, ensuring that communities along the route would maintain and improve their sections of the highway. But it also created new challenges. The association had to coordinate the efforts of hundreds of local governments, each with its own priorities, budgets, and construction standards. Some communities were eager to improve their roads and had the resources to do so. Others were reluctant to spend money on highways that would primarily benefit through traffic. The association's first major initiative was the Seedling Miles program, launched in 1914. The idea was to build short sections of model highway in each state along the route, demonstrating what the completed Lincoln Highway should look like. These demonstration sections would show local officials and citizens what was possible and inspire them to improve their own sections of the route. The first Seedling Mile was built in DeKalb County, Illinois, just west of Chicago. The association hired contractors to build a mile of concrete pavement to the highest standards of the day, 20 feet wide, 8 inches thick, with proper drainage and grading. The cost was $13,800, an enormous sum for a single mile of road, but the result was impressive. The DeKalb Seedling Mile attracted thousands of visitors, including highway officials from across the country. Many had never seen a concrete highway before, and they were amazed by its smoothness and durability. The demonstration was so successful that other states began requesting their own Seedling Miles. But building demonstration sections was easier than improving the entire route. Much of the Lincoln Highway remained in terrible condition, particularly in the western states where traffic was light and local governments had limited resources. Travelers who attempted to drive the complete route often found themselves stuck in mud, lost on unmarked roads, or stranded with mechanical problems in remote areas. The association responded by creating the first comprehensive highway guide for automobile travelers. The complete official road guide of the Lincoln Highway provided detailed directions, maps, and information about road conditions, hotels, and repair shops along the entire route. The guide was updated annually and became an essential resource for transcontinental travelers. The association also established a marking system to help travelers stay on the correct route. Red, white, and blue bands painted on telephone poles, fence posts, and rocks marked the Lincoln Highway throughout its length. The colors were chosen to evoke the American flag, reinforcing the highway's patriotic symbolism. By 1915, the Lincoln Highway was passable from coast to coast, though much of it remained unpaved and challenging. The association estimated that a careful driver could complete the journey in 20 to 30 days, depending on weather and road conditions. It was still an adventure, but it was no longer an expedition. Chapter 5: The Great War and Government Awakening. World War I transformed the Lincoln Highway from a private experiment into a national necessity. As America prepared to enter the war in 1917, military planners suddenly realized that the nation's poor roads were a serious strategic weakness. How could the country mobilize its resources and move troops and supplies efficiently without a decent highway system? The crisis came to a head during the summer of 1919 when the U.S. Army organized a transcontinental motor convoy to test the feasibility of moving military equipment by road. The convoy, consisting of 81 vehicles and 300 personnel, would follow the Lincoln Highway from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco, documenting road conditions and identifying problems along the way. The convoy departed Washington on July 7, 1919, with great fanfare and optimistic predictions of a quick journey. The reality proved far different. The convoy immediately encountered problems. Vehicles broke down, roads proved impassable, and bridges collapsed under the weight of heavy trucks. What should have been a 2-week journey stretched into more than 2 months. Among the officers accompanying the convoy was a young lieutenant colonel named Dwight D. Eisenhower. The future president was appalled by the condition of American roads and the difficulty of moving vehicles across the continent. The experience would influence his thinking for the rest of his life and eventually lead to his championing of the interstate highway system in the 1950s. The convoy's struggles were front-page news across the country, highlighting the inadequacy of American roads and the need for federal action. The Lincoln Highway, which represented the best that private initiative could accomplish, was clearly not enough to meet the nation's transportation needs. Congress responded with the Federal Aid Road Act of 1921, which established the first federal highway program and provided matching funds for state highway construction. The act marked the beginning of the end for private highway organizations like the Lincoln Highway Association, but it also ensured that the association's vision of a transcontinental highway would finally be realized. The federal program brought standardization and coordination to highway construction for the first time. States were required to designate a system of primary highways that would receive federal funding. Construction standards were established to ensure that federally funded roads would be built to consistent specifications. The Lincoln Highway benefited enormously from the new federal program. Sections that had remained unpaved for years were finally improved with federal and state funding. The route was incorporated into the new federal highway system, ensuring its long-term maintenance and improvement. But the federal program also changed the nature of the Lincoln Highway. What had begun as a private initiative, driven by individual vision and local pride, became part of a bureaucratic system managed by government agencies. The personal touch and entrepreneurial spirit that had characterized the early highway movement gave way to standardized procedures and professional engineering. Chapter 6: The Numbered Highway Era. The transformation of American highways reached its climax in 1926 with the creation of the numbered U.S. highway system. For the first time, major highways would be designated by numbers rather than names, and the entire system would be coordinated by federal and state officials rather than private organizations. The Lincoln Highway Association faced a difficult decision. They could fight to preserve the Lincoln Highway name and route, or they could cooperate with the new system and see their highway incorporated into the federal network. After much debate, they chose cooperation over confrontation. The Lincoln Highway was divided among several numbered routes. The eastern section became part of U.S. Route 30, which ran from Atlantic City, New Jersey, to Astoria, Oregon. The western section was incorporated into U.S. Route 40, which extended from Atlantic City to San Francisco. Other portions became parts of U.S. Routes 1, 6, and 50. The numbering system was more practical than the old named highways, but it lacked the romance and emotional appeal that had made the Lincoln Highway special. Route 30 was efficient and descriptive, but it didn't stir the imagination the way Lincoln Highway had. Many supporters of the old system mourned the loss of the colorful highway names. The Lincoln Highway, the Dixie Highway, the National Old Trails Road, and dozens of other named routes had captured the American imagination and created emotional connections between travelers and the roads they traveled. The numbered system was more rational, but it was also more sterile. The Lincoln Highway Association officially disbanded in 1927. Its mission accomplished. The transcontinental highway that Carl Fisher had envisioned in 1912 was now a reality, even if it bore different numbers and was managed by government agencies rather than private organizations. But the association's legacy extended far beyond the physical highway. The Lincoln Highway had demonstrated that Americans could accomplish seemingly impossible tasks through private initiative and cooperation. It had shown that good roads were essential to economic development and national unity. Most importantly, it had established the principle that America needed: a coordinated nationwide highway system. The techniques and standards developed for the Lincoln Highway became the foundation for all subsequent highway construction in America. The concrete pavement, standardized width, proper drainage, and consistent signage that the association had pioneered became standard features of the federal highway system. The Lincoln Highway had also created the first truly national highway culture in America. The guidebooks, maps, and promotional materials produced by the association established the template for highway tourism that would flourish in the decades to come. The idea that Americans could explore their country by automobile, staying in motor courts, and eating at roadside restaurants began with the Lincoln Highway. Chapter 7. The Roosevelt Years and New Deal Roads. The Great Depression brought new challenges and opportunities to America's highway system. As unemployment soared and the economy collapsed, President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal programs identified highway construction as an ideal way to put Americans back to work while building infrastructure that would benefit the entire nation. The Lincoln Highway route benefited enormously from New Deal spending. The Works Progress Administration and the Civilian Conservation Corps employed thousands of workers to improve and modernize sections of the old highway. Bridges were rebuilt, grades were reduced, and curves were straightened. Much of the route was widened from 2 lanes to 4, and concrete pavement replaced the brick and macadam surfaces that had characterized the early highway. But the New Deal also accelerated the transformation of the Lincoln Highway from a named route into a collection of numbered highways. Federal planners were more interested in creating an efficient transportation network than in preserving the historical significance of particular routes. The Lincoln Highway name appeared less frequently on official maps and road signs, though it persisted in local usage and historical references. The approach of World War II brought new urgency to highway improvement. Military planners, remembering the lessons of the 1919 Army convoy, recognized that good roads would be essential for national defense. The Lincoln Highway route, connecting major industrial centers from New York to San Francisco, was designated as a strategic highway and received priority for improvement. During the war, the highway carried unprecedented traffic as as defense plants worked around the clock and military personnel moved between bases. The route proved its worth as a transportation corridor, but it also revealed its limitations. Even with all the improvements of the 1930s, the highway was still a two-lane road for much of its length, creating bottlenecks and delays that hindered the war effort. These wartime experiences would influence post-war highway planning and eventually lead to the interstate highway system that would supersede the Lincoln Highway and other early transcontinental routes. Chapter 8. The Interstate Era and Transformation. The Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, signed by President Eisenhower, authorized the construction of the interstate highway system and marked the beginning of the end for the Lincoln Highway as America's premier transcontinental route. Eisenhower, who had experienced the inadequacy of American roads during the 1919 Army convoy, was determined to build a highway system worthy of the world's leading nation. The new interstate highways would be limited-access roads with no traffic lights, no railroad crossings, and no roadside businesses. They would be designed for high-speed travel and heavy traffic, with multiple lanes in each direction and gentle curves that would allow safe travel at 70 miles per hour or more. The interstate system largely paralleled the route of the Lincoln Highway, but it bypassed most of the cities and towns that the older highway had served. Interstate 80, which became the primary east-west route across the northern United States, followed a path similar to the Lincoln Highway but avoided the congested downtowns and commercial strips that slowed traffic on the older road. The impact on Lincoln Highway communities was dramatic and often devastating. Towns that had prospered for decades by serving transcontinental travelers suddenly found themselves bypassed by the new interstates. Gas stations, restaurants, and motels that had thrived on highway traffic closed their doors as travelers chose the faster, more convenient interstate routes. Some communities tried to adapt by relocating their businesses to interstate exits, but the interstate environment was different from the old highway. Travelers on the interstates were focused on speed and efficiency, not on the personal service and local character that had made the Lincoln Highway special. The physical infrastructure of the Lincoln Highway began to deteriorate as traffic declined. State highway departments reduced maintenance on sections that carried little traffic. Some portions were actually abandoned and allowed to return to nature. But even as the Lincoln Highway declined as a transportation route, it was beginning to gain recognition as a historical and cultural resource. Historians and preservationists began to document the highway's role in American development and to argue for the preservation of its remaining landmarks and attractions. Chapter 9. Rediscovery and Preservation. The 1970s and 1980s brought a new appreciation for the Lincoln Highway's historical significance. As America celebrated its bicentennial in 1976, there was renewed interest in the nation's transportation history and the role that highways had played in American development. Historians like Drake Hokanson began researching and writing about the Lincoln Highway, documenting its construction, its impact on American society, and the stories of the people who had built and traveled it. Their work revealed that the highway had been more than just a transportation route. It had been a catalyst for social and economic change that had transformed American life. Preservationists began working to save the remaining landmarks and attractions along the Lincoln Highway route. Historic bridges, roadside architecture, and vintage signs were identified and protected. Museums were established to tell the story of the highway and its role in American history. The Lincoln Highway Association was revived in 1992, not as a highway building organization, but as a historical and educational group dedicated to preserving the memory and legacy of America's first transcontinental highway. The new association organized tours, published research, and worked with local communities to mark and interpret historic sites along the route. The preservation movement faced significant challenges. Much of the original Lincoln Highway infrastructure had been demolished or had deteriorated beyond repair. Many of the businesses and attractions that had made the highway famous were gone forever. The preservationists were often trying to recreate something that existed more in memory than in physical reality. But the movement also had significant successes. Historic markers were installed at key locations along the route. Vintage signs and roadside architecture were restored. Museums and visitor centers were established to interpret the highway's history for new generations of travelers. The Lincoln Highway also benefited from the growing interest in heritage tourism. Americans who were tired of interstate travel began seeking more meaningful and authentic travel experiences. The Lincoln Highway offered something the interstates couldn't: a connection to history, a sense of adventure, and a glimpse of an America that was rapidly disappearing. Chapter 10: Legacy and Lessons. As the Lincoln Highway approaches its second century, its legacy extends far beyond the 3,389 miles of road that Carl Fisher envisioned in 1912. The highway pioneered concepts and techniques that became fundamental to American transportation and development. The Lincoln Highway was the first highway designed specifically for automobile travel, establishing standards and practices that influenced all subsequent road construction. Its concrete pavement, standardized width, consistent signage, and coordinated route marking became the template for the federal highway system that followed. The highway also created the first national highway culture in America. The guidebooks, maps, and promotional materials produced by the Lincoln Highway Association established the framework for highway tourism that would flourish throughout the 20th century. The idea that Americans could explore their country by automobile, following marked routes and staying at motor courts, began with the Lincoln Highway. Perhaps most importantly, the Lincoln Highway demonstrated that private initiative could accomplish what government had been unable or unwilling to do. Fisher and his associates proved that visionary leadership, combined with practical organization and persistent effort, could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The highway's construction also revealed the importance of cooperation between different levels of government and between public and private sectors. The Lincoln Highway Association's success came not from imposing a top-down solution, but from working with local communities and governments to achieve shared goals. The lessons of the Lincoln Highway remain relevant today as America faces new transportation challenges. The highway showed that infrastructure investment could stimulate economic development and social change. It demonstrated that transportation networks could unite a diverse nation and create new opportunities for individual advancement. The Lincoln Highway also illustrated the importance of vision and leadership in accomplishing great projects. Fisher and his associates didn't wait for someone else to solve America's transportation problems. They took action themselves and inspired others to join their cause. Today, as America debates infrastructure investment and transportation policy, the Lincoln Highway story offers both inspiration and practical lessons. The highway that began as one man's audacious dream became the foundation for the modern American transportation system and a symbol of what Americans can accomplish when they work together toward a common goal. The Lincoln Highway changed America not just by connecting its coasts, but by proving that no distance was too great, no challenge too daunting for American ingenuity and determination. It showed that the automobile could be more than just a machine. It could be an instrument of freedom, opportunity, and national unity. Today, if you know where to look, you can still find traces of the Lincoln Highway. Historic markers dot the route from New York to California. Vintage bridges carry modern traffic over rivers and valleys. Old concrete pavement, cracked but still serviceable, bears the weight of 21st century vehicles. But the Lincoln Highway's greatest legacy isn't physical. It's the idea that Americans can go anywhere, do anything, and achieve the impossible if they have the vision to dream and the determination to act. That's the road that changed America.